February 14th, 1943. Dawn. Faid Pass, Tunisia. Captain Ernest Hatfield, aide to Major General Orlando Ward, commander of the U.S. 1st Armored Division, woke to an urgent telephone call at 0700 hours. The voice on the other end was tense. Enemy armor massing at Faid Pass, at least 90 tanks, maybe more. Hatfield pulled on his boots and rushed to headquarters. Through binoculars, American observers watched a sight that would haunt them for years: a massive column of German Panzers rolling through the mountain pass, silhouetted against the rising sun. By 0715 hours, 20 German tanks had reached a point 5 miles northeast of Sidi Bouzid. By noon, 50 enemy tanks with infantry and artillery had reached the northwest slopes of Jebel Lasouda. Among those panzers were vehicles American intelligence officers had heard rumors about, but dismissed as exaggerated. Approximately 6 Mark VI heavy tanks, Tigers. Arab nomads passing between the lines had warned American soldiers for weeks. The Germans have a powerful new tank, they said. It can destroy your tanks from very far away. The GIs laughed. Sure, pal, right. They weren't laughing anymore. What happened over the next 10 days, from February 14th to February 24th, 1943, in a series of battles around Kasserine Pass, would shatter American confidence, destroy hundreds of tanks, and force a complete reevaluation of U.S. armor doctrine. Allied losses: 10,000 casualties, 6,500 Americans, of 30,000, plus 183 tanks. The Tiger tank had arrived in North Africa, and American Sherman crews were about to learn that courage, training, and patriotism meant nothing when your enemy could kill you from a mile away, while your own gun couldn't scratch his armor. The intelligence reports had seemed absurd. A German tank weighing over 55 tons? Impossible to transport. Frontal armor 100 millimeters thick? Ridiculous overkill. An 88-millimeter gun that could penetrate any Allied tank from 2,000 meters? Clearly propaganda. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Hightower led Companies H and I of the 1st Armored Regiment and 12 tank destroyers from the 701st Tank Destroyer Battalion out of Sidi Bouzid to engage the Germans. His force included M3 Stuart light tanks, which American tankers affectionately called Honey, and the new M4 Sherman medium tanks mounting 75-millimeter guns. The M3, with a range of only 1,800 yards, bore the distinctly unmilitary nickname Honey. The Germans had another name for it. They called the M3 Ronson, after the cigarette lighter, because it burst into flames so readily. Hightower's men were confident. They'd trained extensively. Their equipment was new. American industrial might had produced these tanks by the thousands. Surely quantity and American ingenuity would prevail over whatever the Germans fielded. Then the Tigers opened fire. Mark VI Tiger tanks armed with 88-millimeter guns were mixed in with the more familiar 75-millimeter gunned Mark IVs. The new Tigers had a firing range twice as long as the American M3s, and they quickly put that advantage to good use. Radio Sergeant Clarence Coley, manning Hightower's own M4 Sherman, later described the engagement. All the time we were firing at the supermen, Nazis. They were not wasting any time. We were getting it hot and heavy. I did not keep count, but we received many hits on our tank. I could feel the shock and hear the loud noise as those projectiles bounced off. Our luck finally ran out. A round got stuck in the gun, wouldn't go in or come out, and about the same time, one of the enemy guns got a penetration in our tank. The projectile came in the left side, passing through the gas tank, ricocheting around, and winding up on the escape hatch just behind my seat.
Coley watched, mesmerized with horror, as the 88mm round stood on end, spinning like a top, with fire flaming out of the upper part like a tracer round. Miraculously, the round didn't explode. Coley and his crew abandoned the burning Sherman and ran for their lives. They were the lucky ones.
February 15, 1943, the day American armor died in Tunisia. With a number of his Shermans knocked out and burning, Hightower conducted a fighting withdrawal back to Sidi Bouzid. But headquarters refused to accept the scope of the disaster. Counterattack, take back the ground, show the Germans that American steel can fight. Combat Command C of the 1st Armored Division received orders to counterattack. Lieutenant Colonel James Alger's 2nd Battalion, 1st Armored Regiment, would lead 52 Sherman tanks directly toward German positions around Sidi Bouzid. Standard American doctrine: tank destroyers would handle enemy armor, while the Shermans exploited breakthroughs and attacked infantry positions. The doctrine was about to be tested against an enemy who hadn't read the American tactical manuals. The Germans had prepared a classic ambush. German aircraft and artillery fire disrupted Alger's attack and slowed his advance enough to allow German armor to begin to envelop the U.S. force. Anti-tank guns positioned on firm ground. Panzers waiting on both flanks. The trap was perfect. Alger's Shermans advanced into the kill zone without reconnaissance, without air cover, straight into withering fire. By the time CCC withdrew several hours later, it had lost 46 of 52 M4 Sherman medium tanks, along with 15 officers and 298 men killed, captured, or missing. 46 tanks destroyed out of 52 deployed. An 88% loss rate. After the battle, the Germans were elated as they searched the wadis and villages for survivors. Experienced Panzer crews who had fought in Russia and the Western Desert were heard to exclaim that they had seen nothing like it before. The comparison was immediate and brutal. After the war, Alger compared the action that day to the ill-advised charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava on 25 October 1854. But a more appropriate comparison would have been General Custer's last stand at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But here's the revelation that would fundamentally change American understanding of the threat. Only one was hit by a German 88mm round from either the anti-tank guns or from the handful of available Panzer Mk6 Tigers. All of the rest were hit with 50mm rounds from Panzer Mk3s, which constituted most of the German force, or by 75mm rounds from Mk4s. The Tigers hadn't destroyed most of the Shermans. The psychological terror they created had done the job for them. The Panzerkampfwagen 6, Tiger 1, was everything the intelligence reports had claimed and more. Weight: initially slightly more than 51 tons, eventually reaching 57 tons in combat configuration. Armor: up to 4 inches, 100 millimeters, at the front and 3.1 inches, 80 millimeters, at the sides. This was armor that could withstand virtually any Allied anti-tank weapon when engaged frontally. Main armament: the 8.8 centimeter QWK-36, Kampfwagenkanon, an 88mm tank gun derived from the 8.8 centimeter Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun. Ammunition capacity: up to 92 projectiles of 88mm ammunition could be carried aboard a typical Tiger, though crews often carried over 100 rounds. Crew: 5 men, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. Engine: a 700 horsepower Maybach engine, providing barely adequate power for the vehicle's enormous mass. Maximum speed: 24 miles per hour on roads. The 88mm gun's performance was devastating. In British firing trials during the war, a British gunner scored 5 successive hits from 1,200 yards at a 16 by 18-inch target. Another 5 rounds were fired at targets moving at 15 miles per hour, and although smoke obscured the gunner's observation, 3 hits were scored. At combat ranges, the Tiger could engage with near certainty of first-hit kills. The 88mm gun could destroy a Russian T-34 at a mile or 1.5 kilometers away. Against American Shermans, the advantage was even more pronounced. The Sherman tank could penetrate the frontal armor of the Panzer IV at a range of 2,600 meters and flank armor at 5,000 meters. In comparison, the Panzer IV could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at 2,100 meters, but the Sherman could not penetrate the Tiger at any range and could only penetrate the flanks within 1,900 meters. Think about that tactical reality. A Tiger could engage Shermans from beyond 2,000 meters, over a mile, with virtual impunity. Sherman crews had to close to within 500 meters and maneuver to flank or rear positions for any hope of penetration. Crossing that 1,500-meter gap under fire from an 88mm gun was a death sentence. The German doctrine was explicit. The heavy tank forms the core of the spearhead, and their main objective is the enemy tanks and anti-tank guns that can only be eliminated by using the greater range and larger gun of those tanks.
The real power of the Tiger wasn't just its gun or armor, it was the terror it created. Due to its thick armor and firepower, Tigers had a bigger psychological effect on opposing crews, causing a Tiger phobia. Allied tankers would sometimes evade rather than confront a Tiger, even a tank that only looked like one, such as the Panzer IV with turret skirts applied. Tiger phobia became a documented medical condition. American tank crews who had encountered Tigers displayed symptoms of combat stress far exceeding normal battlefield anxiety. The mere report of Tigers in an operational area would cause units to halt advances, request artillery support, and call for airstrikes before proceeding. One Tiger could paralyze an entire American armored column, not through actual combat effectiveness, though that was formidable, but through reputation alone. Intelligence officers recognized the problem immediately. Training materials distributed to American armored units in March 1943 emphasized repeatedly, Tigers are rare. Tigers have weaknesses. Tigers can be defeated. But the training materials couldn't answer the fundamental question every Sherman tanker asked. How do I defeat a Tiger when I can't penetrate its armor and it can destroy me from a mile away? The honest answer was you don't. You call for artillery, you call for air support. You flank it with multiple tanks, accepting that some of you will die. You avoid direct confrontation. That wasn't the answer tankers wanted to hear.
The Battle of Kasserine Pass took place from 19 to 24 February 1943 at Kasserine Pass, a 2-mile-wide gap in the Grand Dorsal Chain of the Atlas Mountains in west-central Tunisia. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Panzer Army Africa and elements detached from the 5th Panzer Army, saw an opportunity to inflict a devastating blow on inexperienced American forces. On February 14, 1943, General Lieutenant Heinz Ziegler ordered his Panzer columns forward to attack the American forces deployed in central Tunisia. More than 100 tanks and half-tracks and trucks packed with infantry rumbled through the Faid Pass. The German plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Strike American positions, exploit poor defensive positioning, destroy forward units before they could retreat, push through Kasserine Pass toward American supply bases in Algeria. Defending the pass was a force consisting of the U.S. 1st Battalion, 26th Regimental Combat Team, the U.S. 19th Combat Engineer Regiment, the 6th Field Artillery Battalion, a Tank Destroyer Battalion, and a battery of French artillery. They never had a chance. On February 19th, a veteran German-Italian assault group smashed into the U.S. troops holding the pass. The German Panzer IV and Tiger tanks were vastly superior to the U.S. M3 light tanks and light anti-tank guns, and soon the Americans were retreating along the pass in disarray. The combat was one-sided. German panzers, positioned on high ground with clear fields of fire, methodically destroyed American positions. Tigers engaged from ranges where American weapons were useless. Panzer IVs and IIIs maneuvered against exposed flanks. American units fought bravely. Individual acts of heroism were common, but courage cannot defeat physics. When your enemy can kill you from 2,000 meters and you can only respond effectively at 500 meters, tactics become irrelevant. During one day of battle, the 1st Armored Division lost 48 M4 tanks, over half of their tanks. Burning Shermans littered the Tunisian landscape. Most deployed here ended up like this one, after an internal explosion tore the Turin off. By February 22nd, Rommel's offensive had penetrated 50 miles into Allied positions. American forces were in full retreat. The psychological impact was catastrophic. These were soldiers who had arrived in North Africa convinced they were the best-trained, best-equipped force in the world. They had dismissed British warnings about German tactical excellence. They had underestimated their enemy. Now they were dying by the hundreds, their tanks burning, their confidence shattered.
Rommel's offensive eventually stalled, not because American forces defeated it, but because Allied resistance increased and German supply lines were overextended. By February 23rd, Rommel ordered withdrawal. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel launched a bold strike against the Americans at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, but failed to achieve his lofty objectives. The Battle of the Kasserine Pass and the preliminary operations cost the Germans and Italians 2,000 men. On the Allied side, the U.S. Second Corps lost 6,500 of its 30,000 men, 183 tanks, 194 half-tracks, 208 artillery guns, and over 500 trucks and jeeps. The physical losses were devastating. The psychological impact was worse. The biggest impact of the fighting was on the confidence of the U.S. Army, which had arrived in North Africa convinced that it was the best trained and best equipped in the world, and rarely willing to take advice from its more experienced British allies. But the American Army learned quickly. The Battle of the Kasserine Pass was a shock to the Americans, but one final casualty was General Fredendall, who was replaced on March 6th by the considerably more aggressive Major General George S. Patton. Patton arrived in Tunisia like a whirlwind. He recognized immediately what had gone wrong: poor leadership, inadequate training, failure to concentrate forces, and psychological paralysis caused by tiger phobia. He addressed the latter directly in a famous speech to assembled tankers. "I don't want to hear any more about tigers. Yes, they're tough. Yes, they outgun us, but they're not invincible. They break down, they run out of fuel, they can be flanked, and there are only a few of them. We have hundreds of tanks. Use your heads, use your numbers, and for God's sake, stop being afraid of a goddamn tank." The psychological war began to turn.
Post-battle analysis revealed uncomfortable truths about American armor. The M4 Sherman was a good tank, in many ways superior to its reputation. The Sherman outclassed the Panzer III in firepower and armor protection. The Panzer III weighed only 22 tons, protected by 50 millimeters of frontal armor and mounted a 50 millimeter main gun. And the Sherman was roughly equal to the Panzer IV. The Panzer IV weighed 26 tons, protected by 65 millimeters of frontal armor, and mounted a high-velocity 75 millimeter gun. Against 90% of German armor, the Sherman competed effectively. It was reliable, easy to maintain, and produced in enormous quantities. American tank doctrine emphasized mechanical reliability and operational sustainability over individual vehicle superiority. Lessons learned from the Tiger 712 fuel consumption testing. But against Tigers, the Sherman was hopelessly outmatched. In July 1944, one Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger I destroyed 25 tanks of the British 7th Armored Division Desert Rats before it was finally knocked out from behind. The solution emerged gradually. Avoid Tigers when possible. When avoidance was impossible, engage with overwhelming numbers. In the Normandy campaign, it could take 4 to 5 Shermans to knock out a single Tiger tank by maneuvering to its weaker flank or rear armor. The tactic was brutal but effective. American doctrine evolved to accept that defeating a Tiger required sacrificing multiple Shermans to maneuver 1 or 2 into flanking positions. The first tanks would die. The Tiger crew would be busy reloading. The flanking tanks might get a killing shot into side or rear armor. It was a numbers game. America had numbers. Germany didn't.
For all its fearsome reputation, the Tiger was fundamentally flawed as an operational weapon system. Even with extra-wide tracks, the Tiger I's cross-country mobility was poor, and it was subject to frequent mechanical breakdowns. Weight was the fundamental problem. At 57 tons, the Tiger was too heavy for most bridges. It couldn't cross many rivers without specialized bridging equipment. But at their Leningrad and Kursk debuts in late 1942 and July 1943, respectively, Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger I tanks were sent into battle in small, unsupported units after inadequate planning. They were too few and spread too far apart as they attacked Soviet anti-tank defenses of greater depth than had ever been seen before. Nearly all of these Tigers were destroyed. Fuel consumption was catastrophic, as the testing of captured Tiger 712 would later reveal. Production numbers were inadequate. About 1,347 units were produced between 1942 and 1944. Compare that to over 50,000 Shermans produced during the same period. Germany couldn't build Tigers fast enough, couldn't supply them adequately, couldn't provide enough trained crews, and, critically, couldn't concentrate them in sufficient numbers to achieve strategic effect. But as the Nazi German army learned to use the Tiger to its best advantage, its reputation grew to awesome and legendary proportions. Its heavy armor made it practically impervious to frontal attack, and its high-velocity 88mm gun was ready to chastise anything that came within range. That reputation, that terror, was perhaps the Tiger's greatest weapon.
By summer 1943, American armored doctrine had evolved dramatically from the naive confidence of February. Training emphasized never engage Tigers frontally unless absolutely unavoidable. Use artillery and air support whenever possible. Attack in overwhelming numbers when direct engagement is necessary. Aim for tracks and running gear to immobilize, then flank. Recognize that casualties are inevitable when fighting Tigers. The British solution was more direct. It wasn't until the British modified the tank into the Firefly with its 17-pounder that Allied forces had a tank-mounted gun capable of penetrating Tiger frontal armor at reasonable combat ranges. The American solution was different, except that Shermans couldn't match Tigers individually. Instead, leverage American advantages, numerical superiority, industrial capacity, logistical sustainability, and air superiority. The ratio of Sherman losses to Tiger or Panther tanks was nothing to ignore. You took your tank out with a song and prayer. A lot of young men paid the ultimate price while being in the Sherman.
The Tiger's impact on World War II was disproportionate to its numbers.
Until August 1944, 1,300 Tiger I were built, which is not much when you consider the impact on Allied combat morale. Fewer than 1,400 Tigers versus more than 50,000 Shermans, 55,000 T-34s, and countless other Allied tanks. Yet the Tiger dominated the psychological battlefield. Every Allied tanker knew the Tiger's reputation. Every commander planned operations with Tiger encounters in mind. Every tactical manual emphasized Tiger-specific countermeasures. Despite its limitations, the Tiger I had a significant psychological impact on Allied forces and influenced tank design for years to come. Post-war American tank development focused heavily on firepower. The M26 Pershing rushed into service in early 1945, mounted a 90mm gun specifically to counter Tigers and Panthers. The M46, M47, M48, and M60 series that followed all prioritized firepower sufficient to penetrate heavy armor. The lesson was clear. Never again would American tankers face an enemy they couldn't hurt. But in February 1943, in the desert of Tunisia, American tank crews learned that lesson the hard way. They had underestimated their enemy. They had dismissed intelligence warnings. They had believed American industrial might alone would guarantee victory. The Tiger tank taught them otherwise. The Kasserine Pass was another turning point as far as it changed the style of tactics used and shook up the upper echelon levels of leadership. Shortly after the battle was over, many of the top brass were relieved of command due to poor performance. The American army that emerged from Tunisia was different from the one that had entered. Humbled, educated, determined. It would take those lessons to Sicily, to Italy, to Normandy, and ultimately to Berlin. But it would never forget the terror of watching a Tiger tank appear on the horizon, knowing your own gun was useless at that range, knowing you had to close the distance under fire, knowing that some of your friends wouldn't survive the approach. The Tiger was the teacher. The Sherman crews were the students, and the tuition was paid in blood on the desert sands of Tunisia. Those who survived carried that knowledge forward. They became the veterans who would train the next generation. They became the commanders who would never again underestimate an enemy weapon. They became the men who understood that war is not won by the best individual weapon, but by the best combination of weapons, tactics, logistics, and determination. The Tiger taught them that lesson definitively, and they never forgot.